Get yourself in the lotus position, because I've got no plan, no pretense, and definitely no bypassing. I'm Josh Connolly, and this will probably be dysfunctional. Okay, episode 11. Let's do this. Today, I'm going to ask the question, are we talking about mental health too much? Whatever mental health is. And I might get into talking a little bit about reactive abuse as well, because it's been coming up again quite a lot on my social media. But I thought I would start with a little bit of a check-in, really, and give myself a little bit of an opportunity to talk a bit about some of the, I'm going to call it overwhelm that I experience, and try and get people to understand it, because whenever I talk about this kind of perhaps overstimulation that I feel, perhaps it's overwhelm, some people would call it anxiety, everybody always rationalizes it in their minds. I am convinced and have the deep-rooted belief that what I feel is very somatic. It's to do with my nervous system and my body. And then I have a tendency to attach it to the rationale stuff or to rational stuff. And then sometimes that means that it can spiral as well. Now, sometimes rational stuff will trigger it. But I'm telling you now, there are times when my body, my system goes into overdrive for no apparent reason. When there's no rational reason whatsoever. And I'm sorry for those of you watching on YouTube, but I'm just going to make a little adjustment there because I feel like the camera isn't straight. And this comes on me semi-regularly. What's super interesting is, I think, as an experience, it gets worse the more aware of myself that I get. And in some ways, this will link to what I want to talk about, of whether we're talking about mental health too much. Because I think sometimes I've become so hyper-aware of myself. I've become so addicted to internal reflection that I think maybe that could be what sets it off. But when I get it, I'm telling you, we don't need a crisis call here. I'm not suicidal or anything like that. But it's really important for me to stress that in those moments, honestly, I would do anything to escape my body. I would do anything to get out of my body. And I know I've talked about this on previous episodes, but so often when you tell people about it, we go straight to, what is it that you're worrying about? And I was in a recovery meeting yesterday, and this subject come up, and everyone that spoke about it talked about, this is a result of fear, and as long as I'm present, I won't feel it, and as long as I don't fear the past, and I just make sure that I don't worry too much about the past, and when I don't do that, then I won't experience anxiety. And I'm sat there, and I'm thinking, fucking you lot are not this. Whatever you're experiencing and feeling, you're either not as aware of it as I am, or you're not experiencing it in the way that I am. Because a crisis helps my anxiety, right? Or this overwhelm, whatever I'm experiencing. Give me something to get busy with and focus on. Let me focus about worrying about next week, and I won't feel as terrible as I do. So I just thought I'd share it, because I know that a lot of people resonate with it when I do talk about it. And I think it's really common. And again, I would say that I talk about being a highly sensitive person. Personally, and this is just a personal perspective, I think everybody's different. I personally find labeling restrictive. But highly sensitive seems to work for me. I've got this overactive nervous system that can turn into hypervigilance, and I talk a lot about hypervigilance, and it can also turn into this kind of overstimulation. And the reason I know that it's a level of overstimulation is because sometimes I feel so overstimulated, I can't even, when I lay in bed, I just putting my leg on top of my other leg, my skin will feel overstimulated by the bed sheets, so I try and put my leg on top of my other leg to get it off, and then my leg touching my over leg can feel overstimulating as well. So yeah, I just thought it was, I've always said with this podcast that I would, make sure that I'm open and honest about where I'm at, and that I'll show up in any way that I am. And I wanted to get rid of the idea that of performance. so that what I'm talking about is real and true. And listen, I don't think there are answers to everything, and I certainly don't have all of them, if there are. But let's get on to the topic of conversation today. There was a few things that I nearly ended up talking about. One of them was going to be TikTok, when I thought that it got banned in America yesterday, but it seems like TikTok have come out and thanked Trump for getting it turned back on, right? And I think it might have been, the lights might have been out for a little while, but it's back on. But I did see, and this fucking pisses me off, man. On LinkedIn, I've got this love-hate relationship with LinkedIn, let me tell you that. I think it's, well, let me explain. When TikTok looked like it was shutting down, there was a fucking grown man, a grown-ass man on LinkedIn who was like a medical fucking teacher. That's not the word they use, is it? What do they call him? But one of them people, yeah, that fucking teaches people about medical stuff. Oh, lecturer. Medical called lecturer of science or something. It didn't have a picture. But he had posted this video of a young girl who, I don't know, she was maybe teenage years, certainly late teens at most. And she was really upset doing her last ever TikTok video. And she was crying and stuff like that. And he'd like posted it and just was fucking taking a piss out of her. And then it had gone, not viral, but there was like hundreds of comments from people, adults, men and women, fucking hammering this young girl, taking the piss out of her, right? And listen, there's fucking nothing that makes my blood boil more than a generation of people that poke fun at, bully, and take the piss out of the younger generation when they grew up on their watch. Like, do you not see how, like, you're actually fucking digging yourself up. These kids are good. We gave them the internet. We gave them social media, yeah? And then we do, we want to fucking take the piss out of them and bully them for the way that they interact with it and use it. And you know what? Like, people blame social media all of the time. And listen, I know social media has huge negative impacts on children. I think it's still new. We need to get to grips with it and figure out how we use it and all that. But I'll tell you what really messes up children, fucking bullying adults who don't, I'm on a rant already. This feels like the first generation where we don't care about our kids. And I think it's fucking disgraceful. They're never at the center of any conversation. Children should be at the center of everything. Everything that we do, like when we think about voting, when we think about measures that we're going to put in place as a society, at the heart of that should be children. It baffles me that they're not, and that nobody wants to talk about it. And by the way, while we're on the subject of social media, the most toxic social media platform out there is Facebook. And that's because it's populated by people that are over 35. And I'm over 35, so I'm fucking pointing at my own demographic here before you start fucking getting antsy about it or whatever you want to do, right? But go on a local Facebook group and you look at the way that adults talk about kids, and I just think that I think we've become such an individualistic, verging on narcissistic society that we point at kids and in the way that we do. And we need to look at ourselves as adults. I think we really, really need to look at ourselves. And yeah, man, like LinkedIn's up there, by the way. LinkedIn's up there as being toxic. And what's interesting about LinkedIn, what makes it worse, I think, than the likes of TikTok in terms of like bullying, because everybody's just passive aggressive on there, like trying to hide it, thinking that because they're doing it passive aggressively, that makes them better than other people. And you get adults on there saying, I'm so terrified at the kids of today, and all the things that they use to alter their faces. What do they call them? Fucking hell. My brain's not kicking into gear today, is it? Filters. Kids using these filters and the way that they alter their pictures and stuff like that. And I understand, and it is problematic and it is worrying. But I do look on LinkedIn and think, you want to start worrying about yourself and the way that you fucking, like, filter what you're posting on here, because just because you're not using a face filter, but you're clearly showing up in a completely different manner. I fucking hate that. We're all guilty of it. Listen, I'm not pointing at everybody else and saying I'll get away from this scot-free, but it really, really irks me when I see adults taking the piss out of young people because of the way that young people are. And it's fucking on us. If they are so bad, it's on us. And I don't think they're as bad, by the way. To be clear, I don't think they're as bad as people like to make out. That's what I believe. But the thing that I did want to talk to you about today is, I don't know if you know this, but Tony Blair, who's like an ex prime minister here in the UK, he has come out and talked about the fact that we might be talking about mental health too much. Actually, what he says, if I can find it here, has recently expressed concerns about the increasing trend of self-diagnosing mental health conditions in the UK. I want to talk a little bit about that. He cautions that labelling the normal ups and downs of life as mental health issues can lead to over-medicalization, potentially overwhelming the NHS, the National Health Service. He emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between genuine mental health disorders and typical life challenges, suggesting that resilience should be encouraged to manage everyday stress. Now, a few politicians have come out quite recently and said, are we talking about mental health too much? Should we keep talking about it? Obviously, I fucking hate the term, but like mental health advocate, I advocate for this stuff. So some of the things that I want to talk about, I have definitely been guilty. I want to reflect on some of the ways that I've worked with organizations and how I do think that actually it can end up being a little bit detrimental. But to start at the idea that we could be talking about mental health too much, listen, I see a lot of people, particularly when we're talking about neurodiversion as well. So I'm kind of going to make sure that I recognize the sort of differences as well, but talk about them a lot. You get a lot of like neurodiverse campaigners online that say the only reason there's been a massive skyrocket of ADHD diagnosis is simply because all of these people suffered in silence before, and now there's a lot more awareness, and they're all coming out and talking. And of course, that's sort of applauded by everybody in the space. I think, and this is a difficult conversation, and I'm here for difficult conversations, I think that it is naive to think that the only reason that there's been a massive upturn in diagnosis is simply because these people suffered in silence. I see a lot of people saying, why the hell would anybody shoot for a diagnosis if they didn't have one? Look, I think there's lots of reasons why this happens, why people could do that. If I take me personally, now I could almost certainly get an ADHD diagnosis, by the way. I've done lots of the kind of online, out of interest, the online tests and stuff, and every one of them comes back, sort of top scores on them. But I have severe addiction issues, and so I'm terrified of the medication. But I definitely could see why people would push to try and get a ADHD diagnosis to get medication. There's one reason. And so I'm not for a second suggesting anybody here that's listening to this that's got ADHD. I'm not for a second suggesting that your experience isn't real, or that you don't have ADHD, or that you might be doing it just because you want medication. But I think we should have the conversation. People that are looking to make sense of their experience are by definition vulnerable. So they are going to look, there are reasons why people could chase a diagnosis and push for a diagnosis when they're trying to make sense of stuff, particularly when some of these symptoms mimic what would happen to the distress that you would experience as a result of a traumatic childhood. If you weren't ready, couldn't comprehend, didn't want to look at your own childhood experience, you could lean towards a diagnosis of some kind. I think we see that very clearly happen with things like depression. So like when we see this big boom, when we see that there are lots more people now being diagnosed with mental health conditions and disorders and stuff like that, I think it's naive to just go, oh, well, that's because they've all suffered in silence and we've broke the stigma. I do think that's a lot of it, right? And I think there's a lot of people that are, and again, I campaign for this, right? So like, there's a lot of people that because of the way that because we've talked so openly about it in the way that we did, there's lots of people now that were suffering in silence and that aren't suffering before. And I think we should continue to talk about it, by the way. What I want to go on to try and explore is if we need to be wary of the way that we talk about it. So what do I mean by that? Well, Tony Blair says in here that we should be distinguishing between general mental health disorders and typical life challenges. I think this is really important. I've got a friend who is a therapist, Scottish lady, and she says, you know, Josh, a lot of people that come to me have actually just got shit life syndrome. And that's what she calls it, shit life syndrome. And when I asked her to explain what she means by that, well, she says you might have somebody who's trapped in a marriage that they don't want to be in, going to a job that they hate every day, and are having struggles with one of their children at school. She's like, they feel anxious, down, depressed, and overwhelmed all of the time. And she's like, that's because their life in that moment, to put it quite bluntly, is shit. So how they're feeling is completely appropriate based on what they're experiencing. Now, they might feel trapped in their marriage for financial reasons, and for similar reasons, they might feel trapped in their job as well. So there's a sense of powerlessness and a sense that they can't get away from this. Now, they could go to the doctor and then look to push for a diagnosis of depression. They could pretty easily find themselves on some form of medication. And then before you know it, they've got a mental health problem now on top of their shit life syndrome, when actually they don't have a mental health problem. They have an appropriate reaction to the life that they're experiencing. And so I do think that we really do need to start to look at this, to start to question it. I take that a step further. I've noticed now that what a lot of people do is, instead of saying, yeah, went through a difficult time, or yeah, it was, I lost my job and I really, felt really stressed and sad about it. They'll say, I lost my job and I really struggled with my mental health. And it's like, what do you mean by that? What do we mean when we say, I really struggled with my mental health? What you mean is you struggled with your life experience. Like, your mental health wasn't bad. Your mental health wasn't failing. And that's when I think it becomes a bit of a problem, is when people start to compare mental health to like physical health. And they go, mental health's just like physical health. If you don't train and look after yourself, and your physical fitness will deplete and your mental health's the same. And it fucking ain't. Emotions are nothing like that. My emotional consciousness is absolutely nothing like my physical health. If I run all of the time, every day, regularly practice, I'm going to build my fitness up. Yes, I might get injuries or whatever, but ultimately my fitness is going to improve. My emotions are not like that. My emotions have fucking never been like that. And so what we do is we create this idea when we say mental health is just like physical health, that if you're struggling with life, if you have emotional struggles in your life, then you're not looking after yourself properly. And it just doesn't work like that. I believe we need to banish this idea. I mean, I don't think we should separate the two, by the way, because I think they're so intrinsically linked. The body doesn't separate them. So why do we? And I understand there are times when sort of linguistically, when we're sort of talking about it, when it can be useful to talk about mental health in terms of like framing it. But I do think that in that respect, it's gone a little bit too far. And what we need to remember is that you do need to develop develop a level of resilience. Now, again, I think people find that really difficult to hear. People find that really difficult because I'm somebody who grew up, the idea that you need to be more resilient, when actually what I needed was fucking systems and support around me to help me develop my resilience. And when people said you need to be more resilient, they were just sort of saying, shut up and get on with it, so I understand why the idea of resilience triggers people. And there's this slightly different part, but still a part of your resilience, but it's a slightly different part, which is toughness. And I think we've lost sight of the need to be able to develop that, because fucking life is tough, man. And I think we made a mistake. There were times when there were no winners and losers at school, and we sort of thought we need to get rid of the stress on the young people and they can't deal with it. So we removed winners and losers from sports days, and and then the kids get in the big bad world and realize that there fucking are winners and losers. And sports is one of the best ways to start to learn. You win and lose in life. You will win and lose in life. And you will need to be tough in life. You can define success in any way that you want, right? You can define success in any way that you want. Family, success in your family. Be a successful father, mother, brother. Be a success in your job. Progress through your career in the way that you want to. Be successful in sports. Be successful in your side hustle. You won't achieve any of it without being tough. You won't achieve any of it without doing things beside yourself, without developing a sense of fortitude. You just won't. It's a cold, hard thing that sometimes that we need to accept. And when you look at resilience is like a level of toughness, but it's also that ability to be able to work on yourself, to be able to make sure that you know how to get your needs met so that you can build the resources in your life to be able to do that. So you can be somebody who doesn't do the toughness very well, but then so you can build the resources in your life to be able to be better equipped to do that. And you can be somebody like me. I tend to sort of tough it out, grit my teeth, close my eyes and hope everything's going to be all right. And I need to develop more strategies around that myself, So I do think that we need to get more comfortable. Some of the mental health conversation, I think, is actually built around emotional avoidance, right? We're trying to get people to not feel their difficult emotions. And so when we say it's a mental health struggle, we try and work away from feeling and experiencing the full range of emotions that we're supposed to feel and experience. So I went on to have a little bit of a look at the history. But Tony Blair's main concerns, by the way, is the over-reliance on medication. I think this is a big problem. I actually just started reading a book called Chemically Imbalanced, which is, I'm not very far into it yet, so I don't want to talk too much about it and sort of get wrong what's going on in there. But this is the whole chemical imbalance theory that we were fed was fucking almost entirely made up. And depression has there's no scientific proof whatsoever that depression has anything to do with low levels of serotonin. Yet some of you, I bet a lot of you that are listening to this, still probably believe that that's the case. But there's no sort of strong science around that. But if we look at the history of the medicalization, it was only in the late 19th century that psychiatry emerged as a formal medical discipline, focusing on treating mental illnesses as biological conditions. So it's a relatively new idea. Asylums and psychiatric institutions became widespread, and mental health issues were often categorized as illnesses requiring medical intervention. The DSM, if you don't know what that is, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, came about in 1952, standardizing and expanding the definitions of mental disorders, and you'll see that that's grown and grown and grown over the years, the list of disorders. Pharmaceutical drugs, so psychiatric drugs, only came about in the 1950s. Things like Prozac came in the 1980s, and these offered a quick, visible relief for mental health symptoms. There was cultural shifts in the 80s and 90s when Western societies placed greater emphasis on individualism, self-optimization, and productivity, often framing emotional struggles as barriers to success. So this is really interesting, right? This kind of rise of individualism, and I've certainly seen that since I was somebody who grew up in the 90s. Communities still existed, I think, relatively strongly then, but I would say now community has almost been abolished. And we sort of saw this individualistic idea that you're all given the same opportunity, that you all raised in the same school, that you all have the same opportunities. And so if you get to 16 years old and you're really, really struggling, it's nothing to do with the system. It's nothing to do with any of that. The problem must be you. And if you're having emotional struggles, well, they're getting in the way of the kind of this capitalistic idea that you know, each individual should chase your goals and dreams. And so if you're somebody that struggles with your emotions, then it gets in the way. It's problematic. So you can then see how the way that we would frame something that we would call a mental health problem has a lot to do with the social structures and societies that we live within. Think about it, right? A lot of mental health problems are because you can't keep going and chasing the fucking dream, the capitalistic dream. So you obviously have a mental health problem because you can't do what the cultural ideas, the cultural norms are. And by the way, I think you see this with a lot of the disorders that we've got. Again, ADHD, right? A lot of the problems that arise for ADHD, people that struggle with ADHD, are because of the systems that they're involved in or that they live in are not equipped to be able to help and support their needs, right? They're set to the kind of main what people call neurotypical ideas of the way that life should be. So, but instead of going, oh, this is a fucking uninclusive system, we live in an individualistic society now that labels the individual as a disorder, with a disorder. And that makes me kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable. By the way, again, I just want to really reiterate, as somebody that really struggles in that way, and I have lots of people close to me that I love dearly who struggle with ADHD, right? And are diagnosed as ADHD, and it's really important for me to say are on medication for ADHD, and it's been life-changing for them. So, I'm not for a second saying that it's all fake and we should get rid of it. I'm saying that we should always explore all of these things, always try to understand them on a deeper level. I think when you look at the rise of psychiatric drugs, by the way, and I think we're up to somewhere in the UK of around 15% of people taking antidepressants. And when you look at some of the studies around antidepressants, it's quite a worrying figure that 15% of the population are on them. Somebody's getting very rich out of that, right? The pharmaceutical companies are getting very, very rich out of that. So are they going to just relinquish and go, oh yeah, well, it's not a chemical imbalance and maybe it is a social issue? They're not going to do that, right? They're going to be working very hard to push their drugs, right? And we know, and I've talked in the past about how regularly they're fined for suppressing data when it doesn't support their needs. The self-help and wellness industries flourished, promoting the idea that any discomfort required intervention or treatment. And by the way, you sort of really see this in the wellness industry now, right? And I see it in the sort of corporate spaces. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is I worked with a company where we created a sort of an emotional space to every month for this small team. It was about 10. And we did it. And actually, looking back on it, what I realized is that actually sometimes we were over focusing on these struggles. It was like you might have these struggles that are just going on in the background here and they're sort of there. We don't have to unpick and look through them all of the time always, right? Because then I believe that there becomes a problem with rumination, where actually we don't always have to work on ourselves. We're not always a problem that needs fixing, right? The wellness industry will always tell you that you're a problem that needs fixing. Right. And again, look, I'm part of the wellness industry. Yeah, I make a living within the wellness industry. So I'm not naive to, I'm not like, oh, I'm the fucking one of the good ones and everybody else is doing it badly. I really do think, though, that we need to look at it. We do need to question sometimes, do we look at this too much? Do we look at this too much? I think a lot of corporate companies that I've worked with and have worked with have started to think, are we looking at this too much? Do we really need to keep sitting down and looking and then pulling out all of our emotions and unpacking them and look at them? I think what happened is that for so long, the pendulum was over here and we never looked at anything, and that causes huge problems. But then if we're not careful, we come over here and it's like every time I feel something that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, let me get it out and unpack it. And I think that's problematic too. And actually, we need to land somewhere here where I'm creating space in my life regularly to do a little bit of work on myself when I need to. And then I need to be able to go, right, okay, we've done that. Now it's time to move forward with my life. I do think that that's really important too. And I think we need to get the balance right on that. And I think a lot of corporate companies are starting to see that, though it's difficult to say it. It's difficult to say it because if you say it, then it looks like you're just sort of saying that it's getting in the way. And here's the issue, is that this sort of hyper-capitalist society that we live in will always take the issue and try and make it fit them. So hyper-capitalism wants you to not talk about your emotions at all so you can just keep working. But then hyper-capitalism over here wants you to talk about them all of the time, because as soon as we make them a problem, then you have to try. It's a problem that you need to go and pay for something to fix. And actually, I guess just thinking about it and talking about it in that way, we need to have a bit more of the realization of the power that we have within us. We all have this innate power. And actually, when we search our souls, when we look within ourselves, we can find what we need. Oh, and I've just had a bit of a look in. Let's take a breath a minute. I can feel a bit of, because I'm talking about like some slightly complex stuff, I can feel a bit of anxiety in me. So let's do it. A breath in through the nose. Yeah, and out through the mouth. I'm going to do another one. Good. On top of that then, what we're talking about, we've obviously got this rise of social media as well. I'm somebody that creates a lot of content around this. So you can also see how this has led to a lot of self-diagnosis as well. Now, the self-diagnosis, we know that with waiting lists, and things like that, self-diagnosis is important because diagnosis can become a little bit of a privilege, right? If you've got enough money to go and get yourself one, you can get one. But like, you know, I hear of like autism waiting lists being as much as like 3 years, even for children, which is fucking insane. So I understand the need for self-diagnosis. I really understand the need for self-diagnosis. And then there's this other category of people that go to get a diagnosis, but don't get one. They don't get the diagnosis because they're told that they don't have this. And then they come away and say, well, I was either, you know, I must have been masking so much in there, or the doctor really couldn't see it in me. So look, again, I sort of understand that. But then at what point do we go, well, if we're not handing the right to the professionals, quote unquote, to diagnose it, and you can just diagnose yourself, and even if they say, no, you haven't got it, well, you can just say that you've got it yourself, then why does it need to be a disorder at all? And I sort of don't like the fact that, like, because I've got one of my children, for example, is sort of, one of my children is going through this now, right? Looking at getting a diagnosis, and they're looking into all of it and all of that sort of stuff. And, you know, I've looked at the pros and cons of diagnosis, because I do think there are pros and cons. And they said to me, look, you know, it's just to get him the correct support that he needs and deserves. And then I'm like, why does a child need what sort of society have we created where a child needs a fucking diagnosis to get the help and support that he deserves? We know the help and support that he needs and deserves. We know what it is, but he can't be given it unless he gets that diagnosis. Yet when you get into adulthood, you can just sort of diagnose yourself anyway, even if you've been and don't get a diagnosis. So for me, that starts to create this kind of complex thing that we need to have better conversations about. And again, I'm going to say to you, I can feel the uneasiness in my body as I'm talking about this, because I know how triggering it can be when, particularly for people that fucking really need diagnosis and haven't been able to get them. And you know, I know that some people have had to fight tooth and fucking nail just to get a diagnosis for their child, the one that they need and deserve. So, like, there's all different parts in this, and there's all different things that we to explore, and it's a difficult conversation. And listen, that's what my podcast is about, trying to have these difficult conversations, and I'm open to learning. And by the way, this is why we're going to get a lot more guests on this year, because I really want to explore this stuff with real, people that are really in it, living it, from true stories, as in lived experience, to professionals that are working in this space as well. But I wanted to put across some arguments for the pathologization of mental health. The most obvious one to me is destigmatization and awareness. The more that we're talking about this, the more that we normalize the conversation, the more people feel that they can appropriately come forward and talk about the things that they're struggling with. Again, there's a double-edged sword to that. I look at things like self-harm. And you look at that and you go, we want to normalize the conversation so that when people are struggling in silence, that they feel like they can talk about it. And also, you don't want to normalize it to the point that it's normal, because we need to make sure that kids realize that it's not normal. It's not a normal reaction. It's an appropriate reaction and relatively normal when you're in deep distress. Yes, it is. So normal's probably the wrong word, but let me highlight what I'm trying to say by giving you a real life example. I was at school once, and I was getting students in an assembly to shout out healthy coping mechanisms. So people were saying running, and somebody was saying sport, and somebody over here was saying talking to friends. And then somebody over here, was a young girl, put her hand up, and I said, yeah, go on. And she went, self-harming? And she said it like that, and it was like, whoa. I said healthy coping mechanisms. And she wasn't quite sure whether it was or wasn't. And so there's this kind of debate to be had, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the solution is. I certainly don't think that we should stop talking about it in schools, because I think that there's too many people that suffer in silence. But when you're seeing stuff like that, you do start to go, fucking hell, man, how do we get the balance right here? Access to treatment is another argument for it, and I've talked a little bit about this. Diagnosing mental health issues ensures access to resources, therapy, and medications, which can be lifelong for severe conditions. Again, that's really important, right? We want to get people the access to the things that they need and deserve. But why should something have to be framed as a mental health problem for somebody to get the help and support that they deserve? There's something wrong with our fucking society. For me, that's the case. Improved research and understanding. It means that we can drive extensive research into this when we pathologize it. However, to do extensive research, you need funds. The funds normally for the extensive research are provided by, you guessed it, pharmaceutical companies. When they're providing the money for the tests and stuff to take place, you've got a bit of a problem. You've got a bit of a conflict of interest here, because if they're profiting so much out of the medication and they're paying for the studies to be done, there's definitely a conflict there. Advocacy and funding is another one that I've got written down here. When we frame mental health challenges as medical conditions, we legitimize the need for funding for them. Again, and that makes perfect sense, right? Here's arguments against pathologizing mental health. Over-medicalization, so normal emotions like sadness, grief, or anxiety risk being labeled as disorders, which is what I've talked about, right? Leading to over-reliance on medications rather than addressing the root causes. When you feel a difficult emotion, in most cases, the reason you're feeling it is because your body knows something's wrong and it wants to get you to change. It wants you to do something about it, right? If we then just dub that down, then we never ever get to the root causes. I do think that that's a freaking problem. I really do think that's a problem. If every time that we feel something difficult, we think, shit, this means there's something wrong with me, we miss what our body's trying to tell us. I really do think that that's a problem. Reductionism, so pathologizing mental health reduces complex human experiences to medical conditions, often ignoring cultural, social, or environmental factors. Again, this is huge. When we just go, and there's a push for a lot of these disorders to just be shown, well, it's just a problem in the brain. And I understand the need to find the biological factors, and so that we can help and support. And I think it reduces stigma when we look at the biological factors. And if we just push it as being like a mental health problem and a problem in the brain, we ignore all the social factors. And that's that's devastating. That's terrible. And when you sort of get to the understanding that pharmaceutical companies sit at the same people that should be funding the social problems that are causing some of these problems. You start to see that they're canoodling all over here, making it an individualistic problem so they can all keep their profits or make more profits. That's a fucking problem. Can people not see that? And again, I think this goes back to what we were talking about in the podcast last week, when I start talking about like golden children who, if you're a golden child type character, you're very likely to just listen to the people in power and do as you're told, because that's what makes you a good person, right? If you're a scapegoat, you go, fucking hang on a minute, I ain't having this. That don't, something's, we fucking need to check what they're doing. And so I just realized I've always questioned it. I've always questioned the norm. I was filling up my car with petrol yesterday, gas, if you're an American, as you might call it. And, you know, obviously you're filling it up with petrol. It fills up really, really quick. So the price goes up really, really quick. And I remember as a child thinking, they've made that really, really quick so that you can never stop it. Because my mum, I remember she always used to try and stop it dead on the pound, yeah? And it would always go like 1 or 2p over. And this was before the days of everybody using a card. So she'd have to find 1 or 2p or whatever, yeah? And I remember used to think they do that on purpose. So that, because if they do that, if there's a million people that fill up every day, that's 1,000,000 2p's, right? And so that kind of, the reason I'm telling you that story, because I was looking at the petrol gauge yesterday when I was doing it. And I was thinking, I've always been like that. I've always looked and seen like potential ulterior motives. So back to this arguments against pathologizing, overdiagnosis and self-diagnosis. So expanding diagnostic categories increase the risk of overdiagnosis, where people may be incorrectly labeled with conditions that they don't have. And again, this is why again, I understand we really need self-diagnosis. It's so important. I can't hammer that home enough. And I worry sometimes that we could then diagnose ourselves with something and just go, well, this is just the way that I am, when actually there's something going on over here that needs to be looked at. I mean, if you give it like a simple example, somebody diagnosing themselves with depression, I've got depression, when actually they're stuck in an abusive relationship, right? But, wow, I'm just depressed. They go to the doctor. He's like, yeah, you seem fucking depressed, right? And then they're just medicating themselves to dub down the ways that they feel, and they're stuck in an abusive relationship. The way that they feel, you would hope, without being dubbed down, would push them to hopefully try and do something that they need to do without victim blaming here too much. But you understand what I'm saying, how these things can get caught up. Economic incentives and commodification. So pharmaceutical companies profit. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Profit from expanding definitions of mental health issues, prompting medication at the first line solution. It's a real problem. You look at the growing list of disorders, and I think I've talked in a previous podcast, but one of the ones I noticed that's fairly new in recent years was generalized grief disorder. That means that somebody gets to decide how long you should be feeling grief for, and then they get to medicate you if you've been feeling it for too long. Am I the only one who goes, that's just a new market? They've just created a new market. Look at the drugs, by the way, that are used for generalized grief disorder, and you'll find that it's just repurposed drugs that they're already using for something else, that they go, oh, this could be really good for this. When, like, we should be looking and going, hang on a minute. The disorders have gone from whatever they were in 1952 to whatever they are now. They've grown exponentially. People are getting more rich as a result of it. We just accept it? Or should we be going, hang on a minute, this looks a little bit like new market categories. Now, it might not be. They might be discovering generalized grief disorder might be something that they've scientifically discovered, and it's like edge of the fucking world stuff. We fucking can't believe it. We've got this medication. It helps. It's changing the way that we view grief. Maybe that is what's going on. Maybe that is. But do you trust that? Do you trust that? Or does it feel a little bit weird to you? Because, I mean, it feels a little bit weird to me. I'll be honest with you. And I think we should be questioning it. We should be questioning these massive, profitable companies that make a lot of money and have got a track record of being full of shit. Like, we should really look at it. Again, another argument against is erosion of resilience. So, listen, I think that we existed for so long in a society that pushed people to be resilient. We used to say children are naturally resilient. Children are not naturally resilient. They're natural born survivors with a huge capacity to be resilient. If you don't give them the support that they need and deserve, then they won't develop resilience. They'll find a way to survive. That's how alcoholic drugs alcoholics are created, drug addicts are created. It's very simplistic to say that, but that's part of the reason, right? But on the flip side of that, if you take away all of a child's problems and just fix them all straight away, they're not going to be able to develop the fucking skills to be able to navigate that either. So both of these things can be true, and we do need to get the blend right. We need to get the balance right. We need to get that right with children. I think we need to get that right in the workplace. You know, there needs to be a sense of like, here's the space for when you are struggling, and here's the space for when we really need to get down and crack on. You know, it's getting that balance right. And I understand that telling you to crack on when you're really struggling might be a triggering thing for you to hear in that moment. And that's because you're not one of the people that I'm talking to when we say that we need to crack on. But I definitely know I can be guilty of ruminating, and I fucking ruminate. And it's like, you know what? Put it away, man. Get busy. There's a whole life out there. And sometimes I'm guilty of that. So it's just understanding that, yeah? And then, of course, the strain on the mental health services is really important. If we're getting lots of people, you know, there are very real and true mental illnesses, right? And it's not that anybody's experience that isn't a very real and true mental illness is not a real and true and difficult experience. I've been through all, you know, so many of them in my life. I'm not saying that. But when we're filling up the services with people that actually what they need is kind of a social support fix. You know, they need somebody to help them navigate what's going on at home or what's going on in their work life. But we've now created this world where we're sending people to jobs that they fucking hate and then medicating them to be able to get through it. Am I the only one? Like, is that crazy? I don't feel like it is. I don't feel like it is. Yeah, I think we're somewhere there. I guess for you as the listener, I would say to you, how is this showing up in your life? You know, are there times when you are guilty of ruminating and actually what you need to do is have a metaphoric, because I know I do sometimes. Sometimes I need a metaphoric splash of cold water on the face and start going again. Come on, you're pulling yourself down here. You're pulling yourself down in this rumination. Pull yourself now. Let's go. Or, you know, maybe that you are really struggling and you need more support and you need more people around you. And that's the thin line. And it is a thin line. It is a really thin line. And I guess I would finish also by saying that anybody that's going through any kind of internal struggle, I started off by talking about the internal battles that I have. I go through deep internal battles, man. Deep internal battles. And when I'm in them, actually everything that I've talked about today is fucking irrelevant, because when you're in it, it's just dark, it's painful, and it's hard. And that's why I'm passionate about the truth. I'm passionate about the truth because I think we get failed a lot. And I think we get failed a lot because a lot of people profit off of our distress. And rather than solving and helping us to navigate our distress, they profit off of it. And that's what I really want to challenge. And so I know I've jumped about a lot in this, but if you are struggling, whatever you feel in your mind is real. I think that's really important as well to say that. All right. I didn't get the chance to get on to reactive abuse. I don't feel like I've got it in the locker to go there now. Maybe we'll save that for next week. But yeah, listen, reach out to me, contact me, let me know what you think of this. I love to be challenged. You know, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where you think I'm right. Tell me where I should explore resources, people that could maybe come on here. And let's keep the conversation going. But aside from that, one thing still definitely remains true. I'm Josh Connolly, and this was definitely dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.